Before the first snow came that year, Caleb Whitfield did a thing he had sworn he would never do, which was to write a letter asking a stranger to marry him, and he did it the same way he did everything on the ranch, which was without ceremony, without waste, and without letting anyone see how much it cost him. The men in town believed they understood the arrangement well enough. A widower with too much land and too few hands, they said, buying himself a housekeeper who happened to wear a ring. What they did not know, what Caleb himself had not fully admitted, even to the cold dark of his own kitchen, was that he was not hiring help for the winter, so much as he was trying to keep a promise he had made to a woman long buried, a promise that the lamp in the front window would never again go dark for want of someone to light it. That lamp had burned every night of his boyhood, kept by his mother against the weather and against the loneliness that came with land this far from anywhere, and since her passing it had sat cold on its shelf more often than not, because a man alone does not light a lamp for himself. He told himself the letter was practical. He told himself a great many things that autumn that were only partly true, and it was in that gap between what he said and what he meant that Nora Fenwick would eventually come to stand. She answered his advertisement with a letter shorter than any of the others he had received, containing no flattery and no questions about his character, beyond whether he was honest and whether he would feed her properly, and something in its plainness struck him harder than any of the perfumed pages the other women had sent. He wrote back one line, "I keep my word and my house is warm." She arrived on the last coach before the mountain pass closed, in a gray coat too thin for the wind, carrying one trunk and a cedar box she did not let the driver touch, and when Caleb saw her standing at the depot with her chin lifted against the cold, he understood immediately that he had misjudged what kind of woman would answer such a letter, though it would be a long while yet before he understood how much. She did not smile at him. She did not apologize for the wind or the weight or the awkwardness of two strangers meeting to be married. She looked at him the way a person looks at a piece of land they intend to work, assessing rather than admiring, and she said only, "You're taller than your letters." It was not a compliment, it was an observation, delivered the way she seemed to deliver everything, and Caleb found himself almost smiling, an expression his own face had grown unfamiliar with before he caught it and put it away. The first weeks were not romance. They were routine, which in its own quiet way became something like it. Nora rose before he did and had the stove going and the coffee bitter and strong, exactly as he liked it, though he had never told her how he liked it, having simply watched him drink it wrong twice and correcting herself the third day without comment. She did not ask him about his first wife, though she must have heard the town's version of that story within a week of arriving, the way all such stories travel through small places faster than weather. She did not offer sympathy he had not asked for. Instead, she worked the way he worked, methodically, without complaint, mending fence alongside him when the hired hands were short, learning the names of his cattle before she learned the names of half the town. And Caleb began to notice things about her, the way a man notices the first cracks of light before dawn, small and easy to dismiss individually, but impossible to ignore once counted together. She flinched almost imperceptibly whenever a rider approached the property before she could see who it was. She kept the cedar box locked beneath her side of the bed and never opened it while he was in the room. She wrote letters some nights by lamplight that she did not send to anyone she named, and burned others before they were finished. He did not ask about these things directly, in part because he had his own locked places and understood the value of a person's right to keep them, and in part because he found he did not want to spoil the fragile, unlabeled thing that was beginning to grow between them by treating her like a mystery to be solved rather than a person to be known. If you have ever waited for a house to feel like a home again, you understand why he was careful. Stay with us, because what Nora Fenwick was running from would not stay hidden much longer, and how Caleb chose to meet it would decide everything. The ordinary days built themselves into something neither of them named aloud. She learned to shoot straighter than most of his hands within a month, out of necessity rather than pride. And when he asked her where she had learned, she said only, "A person learns what a person needs to," and turned back to loading the rifle with hands that did not shake. He learned that she took her tea black and her silences seriously, that she hummed without noticing when she needed bread, that she read the same 3 books over and over rather than none at all, worn soft at the corners from handling. Trust between them did not arrive as a single moment, but accumulated the way frost does, thin and easy to miss until one morning the whole world is covered in it. He began leaving the harder decisions to her counsel, the placement of the winter stores, the pricing of the cattle he meant to sell before the passes closed, and found her judgment sound in ways that surprised him less each time. She began meeting his eyes when she spoke instead of looking past his shoulder at the door, a small thing, but Caleb had learned to read small things the way other men read ledgers. The town noticed too in its blunt and unhurried way. Old Warwick, who ran the feed store and had opinions about everything he had no business having opinions about, told Caleb outright one afternoon that he had never seen a woman handle a plow horse with that much patience or that little fear, and added, without softening it, that whatever Caleb was doing right, he ought to keep doing it, because a woman that steady did not answer advertisements for husbands out of idle curiosity. She answered them because she needed somewhere steady to stand. Caleb turned that thought over more than once in the weeks that followed. He began to understand that Nora had not come to him for a home so much as for a hiding place that happened to look like one, and the difference between those two things, he suspected, was the exact shape of whatever she kept in that cedar box. The first hint of what she was hiding came not from her, but from a letter that arrived addressed to her, under a name that was not quite the one she used, a formality of correspondence that Caleb noticed only because he happened to collect the mail that day and saw the envelope before she took it from his hand a little too quickly. She thanked him for it in a voice gone thin and did not open it in front of him. That night she sat by the stove long after he had gone to bed, and when he woke near dawn to find her still there, the letter reduced to ash in the grate. He said nothing, only banked the fire higher against the cold, and she looked at him with an expression he would later understand as gratitude too large for words. The second hint came from town in the form of a stranger who arrived asking careful questions at the mercantile about a woman of Nora's description, a well-dressed man with an unhurried manner and the particular patience of someone who is not in a hurry because he already believes he has won. Warwick told Caleb about it before Caleb ever had to ask, adding that the man had called himself Elias Vance and had said he was looking for a woman who owed him a debt of considerable size, though he had been careful, Warwick noted, not to say what kind of debt or how it had come to be owed. Caleb rode home slower than usual that evening, turning the name over, and when he reached the house and found Nora at the window watching the road, the way a person watches for weather they know is coming, he understood that the hiding place had been found. He did not confront her the way another man might have, with accusation or demand. He simply sat across from her at the table, the lamp lit between them, and said, "There's a man in town asking after a woman who owes him money." And Nora, who had never once in their months together lowered her eyes from his, lowered them now and said, "His name is Elias Vance, and the debt is not mine. It was my father's, and when my father died it became mine the way debts do, whether a person agrees to inherit them or not." She told him then, in short sentences, with long silences between them, about a ranch smaller than his that had belonged to her family, about a father who had borrowed against it to a man who collected debts the way other men collected land, and about the arrangement that man had proposed when the debt could not be paid, an arrangement that involved her hand in place of the money, an arrangement she had answered by disappearing onto the first coach, heading anywhere else and answering the first honest letter she found. "I did not marry you to hide," she said, "though I will not pretend that is not part of why I came. I married you because your letter was the only one that did not ask me to be anything other than useful." Caleb listened to all of it without interrupting, and when she finished, waiting for whatever judgment he might pass, he said only, "You are not a debt." It was not a grand declaration. It was, in its way, a vow, delivered as plainly as everything else between them had been. And Nora Fenwick, who had not cried once through the whole telling, cried then, quietly, while Caleb sat with her in the lamplight, and did not look away. Elias Vance did not wait long to make his intentions plain. He rode out to the ranch himself within the week, dressed for a negotiation rather than a fight, and laid his case before Caleb in the yard with the flat courtesy of a man who has never once had to raise his voice to get what he wants. The debt, he explained, stood at a sum larger than most ranches in the territory could easily produce, and he had come, he said, not out of cruelty but out of practicality, to collect either the money or the woman who had been promised in its place, and he did not much care which. Caleb listened to the whole speech without interrupting, the same way he had listened to Nora's confession, and when Vance finished, he said only, "She's not for sale, and she's not yours to collect." Vance smiled the smile of a man who has heard such refusals before and watched them crumble under pressure, and said he would give Caleb until the first real snow to reconsider, since he understood that pride cooled slower than weather. What followed was not a dramatic standoff, but a hard and quiet reckoning, Caleb going through his ledgers by lamplight for 3 nights running, counting cattle he had meant to keep through winter, and calculating what selling them early would bring, weighing the ranch's survival against a debt that was not even his to owe. Nora found him at it on the 3rd night and offered to leave, to take the burden with her rather than let it fall on land that had taken his whole life to build. And Caleb's answer to that was the same 3 words, spoken slower this time, so there could be no mistaking them. "You are not a debt." He sold the cattle he needed to, not all of them, but enough, and he rode into town with the money and a witness, and settled the account in full in front of the same men who had speculated all autumn about why he'd hired a bride before winter came. Vance took the money because a debt paid was still a debt paid, whatever his other intentions had been, and he left the territory within the month, and the ranch, thinner in cattle but not in anything that mattered, went on. Caleb never spoke of what the selling cost him, and Nora never again mentioned leaving, and between them that silence became its own kind of promise, understood without needing to be spoken twice. That first real snow came 3 days after Vance rode out for good, settling over the fields in the slow, complete way it does in country that has waited all year for it. And that evening Caleb did something he had not done since his mother's time, which was to light the lamp in the front window before dusk had fully fallen, not for any traveler he was expecting, but simply because the house finally held someone worth lighting it for. Nora found him at the window and stood beside him without speaking, watching the snow catch the light and turn to something almost gold before it touched the ground, and after a long while she said quietly, as if testing whether the words would hold, "I think this is the first winter I have not been afraid of." Caleb did not answer with poetry, because that was not his nature, and it had never needed to be. He only reached over and took her hand, the way a person takes hold of something they intend to keep for good, and said, "Then we'll keep the lamp lit." And outside the snow went on falling over land that had finally, after so long, stopped waiting to be whole.